Hello and welcome. In this video I will go from this pile of parts to this shiny new Skylake build. I'll talk about the parts I chose and how I put them together. Here are the main items. The missing items, the optical drive and the power supply, I moved over from my old build. I chose all these parts to be ideal for a video processing build, hence the super fast processor, and the astute amongst you will notice no video card. That's because my video processing software doesn't use one. This is the solid state drive I chose. Samsung, the 850 EVO series seems to be the preeminent one out there in the market at the moment. I chose a 500 gig drive as a compromise between price and having a large amount of storage without having to swap to a hard drive. In fact, I hope not to actually have to use old-fashioned hard drive at all. Obviously these solid-state drives, in addition to being much more reliable, certainly are a lot faster as well. You can actually get solid-state drives which are actually a lot faster, but certainly very much more expensive. So at this stage I think the old SATA style is the way to go, at least for my budget. Ideally you would have a 1 terabyte, but I don't think that's what I need, and also it's not, it's obviously a little bit more expensive. The operating system, in my case Windows 10, should only take about 60 gigs or so, but with the large video files I intend to have, the remainder will become very useful. Decided to go with this gigabyte motherboard. It represented good value for money. Also, I'd had great experience with my previous gigabyte motherboard. Hadn't failed at all since 2008, which is when I built it. The Z170, Z for the overclocking capability, and 170 to suit the new Skylake processor from Intel. I actually quite like the aesthetic of it as well, the sort of muted brown and greys and blacks there. On the back here we can see the various connectors. On the left there, the old VGA to suit my old monitor, as well as the new DVI. Also sort of in the centre at the bottom there you can see that small plug. That's the USB-C style, that one just there. And along with a whole bunch of USB 3s. Here's the RAM I chose, 2 sticks of 8 gigs, 2400 megahertz, which is slightly above the base clocking rate, so I can overclock that a little. Obviously always a compromise between price and performance. Looking at the bench tests, going much faster than that actually didn't have a great deal of improvement on performance. So this was, I think, a pretty good medium choice. Also, where I purchased the processor, they had a little deal on. This RAM was slightly cheaper with that processor, so that helped sway the decision. This is the CPU cooler. I'm actually very interested in this one. I looked at also liquid coolers, but they didn't seem to give the performance for the price that you paid, and also obviously a slight risk of liquid spillage. So I settled on this one. Seems to be very popular. It's the sort of latest version of their sort of popular range here. I was concerned about the weight of this unit sticking out from the board, sticking directly out and sort of pulling down on the board, but there's this backing plate here comes with it, goes in the back of the motherboard, and apparently provides more than enough support there, so you can see it's sort of steel there and it bolts into the back with some squashy bits to make sure the board doesn't get scratched. You can see there's a fan there to draw or push cool air through all the vanes there, and the heat gets into the vanes through those solid copper pipes there, which that flat bit on the bottom sits on top of the CPU. So the heat gets drawn up into those pipes, into the vanes, and then that fan there pushes the air through. Those fans are very light and delicate, so you certainly have to take care with them when installing. You can also put a second fan sort of clips on the back, and there's actually extra clips in the back in the box to help just clip a standard fan on the back. Here we have the various nuts and bolts and standoffs. This device here actually puts the pressure on the CPU to make sure the heat gets out of it. And there's screws in the end which actually have to be moved to the center location. I didn't do that the first time, and it caused me some grief. On the top there you can see the thermal paste. These are the extra brackets for an additional fan if you choose to add that on later on, I guess, if you want to do a lot of serious overclocking. And this is what all the fuss is about and where all the money goes. The new i7 from Intel, the 6700K. K means it's overclockable. And the 6 is the new series from Intel. Now, what I've read is they put a lot of time and effort into making this particularly good for video rendering, which is why I'm building this machine anyway. And it has, according to all the benchmark tests, it has about 50% improvement on the previous model, which was already pretty lightning fast. So I'm looking forward to doing some nice fast renders to get things done in minutes and hours, not overnight. Okay, so much for all the parts. Now let's have a look at the case. I went with a Carbide 200R, which is a fairly basic sort of design, but covers all the bases and is a great price too. Also has proven to be quite quiet in operation, which is a big advantage. Front comes off with 2 thumb screws like that. The back here, again a couple of thumb screws. The main thing about this back here is it hides all where the cables go. So you can end up with a very neat looking from the front, and all the cables all hidden away in here with cable tied on. I also bought a card reader, USB 3, plugs into the USB 3 header on the motherboard. Takes a wide variety of cards. Mainly I'm interested in the SD card and also the micro SD card, which can just plug straight into the front without an adapter. So I'm looking forward to some fast transfers. Also has a USB 3 on the bottom right there. Okay, let's start putting it together. First of all, slot the chip in there in the socket. Put the holder down with the tension. Try not to scratch the motherboard there. Next comes the RAM. There's 4 slots for the RAM. You need to put the RAM in the colours that are the same when there's only 2 like I have. So 2 greys in this case. And then clean off my fingerprints, ready for the thermal paste later on. Now for my favourite, the cooler. Just take that fan off first of all. Then there's those standoffs which go through there's 4 of those, go through 4 holes. The cooler support plate there then attaches to the backs of those 4 screws. There's actually 3 notches on that plate there as it goes in, and the screws connect into the centre one actually, so obviously designed to fit various motherboards. Once those nuts are in place, they need to be tightened up, and there's a pretty nifty little device included in there. So first of all, give them a bit of a nudge and tighten, and then next along do it up with a screwdriver. Now we squeeze out the thermal paste onto the CPU. Then we go ahead and lower the bottom part of the cooler onto the CPU unit, onto the thermal paste, trying to keep it nice and flat, make sure there's no bubbles or air pockets in there. Also at this stage that X-shaped clamp should be in place, and also the screws in that clamp should be in the right place, which you actually have to do before it's put in place. So the screws actually have to be in into the middle notch, doing up nicely. And then also we have, finally after that, the fan comes on and it clicks on with a couple of little plastic clamps there which come in the box. Just clicks in place there. Then plug into the CPU cooler slot on the motherboard. Okay, now let's bring in the case. First of all, we have to click in that EM shield, which just sort of clicks into place. Now we bring in the motherboard, lower it into place there, and put the screws into position. Yeah, make sure you use the right screws in this case too. I used the wrong screws the first time around. Didn't quite fit into the holes properly. Next I slid in my old hard drive from my old build, 750 gigs, still going strong. So I thought I may as well put it in place since I had it. Also an easy way of transferring the data across from my old system to my new system. Click out the panel there and slide in the optical drive. Next, the power supply from my old machine goes in. A whole bunch of tentacles hanging out the back there. Anyway, it actually went in fairly easily. I found I had to use the original screws from the power supply. I couldn't use anything that came in the box. Trying to put the cables in neatly was probably the most time-consuming part. First plug from the power supply to go in is the main power to the motherboard. You can see there it's made up of two parts there, which have to be connected together, and then they just slot into the motherboard there on the right. Then there's a whole lot of fiddly connectors for the reset button and the lights on the front panel and USBs and all that sort of stuff. The motherboard came with a plastic bag with two SATA cables, which is what these are here, which I'm putting in, which are connected to the optical drive, also the hard drive. Last to go in, last but not least, is the solid state drive. I put it right at the back there because I was getting a bit short, the power cables were getting a bit short, so I had to go right at the back to be quite close to the power cable that also then leads up to the optical drive. That's the power cable going in there. And here comes the SATA cable for it as well. That yellow cable going in there is a third SATA cable. I actually had that left over from before. The box only came with two cables, and since I had three drives, that is the optical, the hard drive and the new solid state drive, I just didn't have enough cables, so luckily I had one lying around. Connector goes from the power supply to the top of the motherboard as well. I think that's ATX they call it, so that's got to tie that up away, make it all nice. There was a few cable ties in the box, which was nice and convenient. So I'm just tidying it all up there, tucking it in where I can, and I know that's out of sight, so I can do pretty much what I want there, as long as it's not too thick and the back plate can still go on. And here we have it, the finished unit. So let's power it up, see what happens. Oh, fans are turning, no smoke, no flames, all good. And there we have it, it's all come together really well, and looks great too.